Dust motes swirled in the narrow beam of light piercing the attic window. Maya stood perfectly still, the floorboards groaning under her weight. In her hands, a leather-bound journal felt heavy, its edges frayed and yellowed by years of neglect. She flipped the cover open. The ink was faded, but the words remained sharp, cutting through the silence of the room. Start a business, write a book, travel, find purpose, help other women. She traced each line with a trembling finger, the ink marks mocking the reality of her 45 years. Every goal listed was a ghost of a version of herself that never existed. She looked around at the stacks of forgotten boxes and the shadows clinging to the rafters. The air in the attic felt thin, stale with the scent of trapped time. She let out a breath she had been holding for decades. The silence of the house pressed against her ears, heavy and absolute. There was no sound of a business being built, no pages of a book written, no passport stamps to show for the years that had slipped through her fingers. The weight of what could have been settled into her chest, cold and immovable. A jagged laugh escaped her, sharp and sudden, echoing off the wooden rafters. It was a sound of disbelief, a brittle reaction to the ghost of her own ambition. She slammed the journal shut. The sound was final, a dull thud that broke the suffocating stillness of the attic. She did not want to look at the words anymore. She did not want to see the evidence of her own stagnation. She grabbed a cardboard box from the floor, the cardboard dry and brittle under her grip, and labeled it with a thick marker. Old stuff. The words looked permanent. She dropped the journal inside. It landed with a soft, hollow sound against the bottom of the box. She pushed the box across the floorboards. It scraped, a harsh, grating noise. She shoved it into the furthest, darkest corner, behind a stack of moth-eaten blankets and a broken chair. She stood up, wiped the dust from her palms, and turned her back on the corner. She walked to the attic stairs, her footsteps heavy and deliberate. She descended into the house, leaving the box in the shadows, determined to keep the past buried where it belonged. The attic door clicked shut, sealing the darkness back into its place, and she walked toward the kitchen. The house was a tomb of silence. Only the rhythmic, metallic ticking of the hallway clock broke the stillness, marking seconds that felt identical to the ones before. Maya sat at the kitchen table, a cup of cold tea sitting untouched before her. The surface of the liquid was perfectly flat, reflecting the dim overhead light. She looked toward the dark corner where she had shoved the box. Her hand moved before she decided to reach out. She pulled the box from the shadows, the cardboard scraping against the floorboards with a dry, harsh sound. She reached inside, her fingers brushing against the rough leather cover of the journal. She pulled it out and set it on the table. The cover was cold. She flipped it open to the last blank page, intending to tear it out, but stopped. Her breath hitched in her throat. Ink sat on the paper, fresh and dark. Her own unmistakable cursive stared back at her. "Dear Maya, you still have time. Love. The woman you were meant to become." The penmanship was identical to her own, yet she had not touched a pen for hours. She slammed the book shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the small room. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, uneven rhythm that drowned out the ticking of the clock. Morning light filtered through the blinds, casting long, thin bars across the floor. Maya woke to find the journal resting on her nightstand, right where she had placed her water glass the night before. She did not remember moving it. She sat up, the sheets rustling, and reached for the book. The leather felt warm against her palm. She opened it. A new page had appeared, the ink still crisp. It read, "What would you do if you were not afraid?" She stared at the words. She stared until the sun climbed higher and the shadows on the wall shifted their position. An hour passed in total stillness. Her gaze remained locked on the question, the ink blurring as her eyes tracked the curves of the letters. Finally, she moved. She walked to the window. The fabric of the curtains was thick and heavy in her grip. She pulled. The rings slid along the rod with a sharp, metallic ring. Sunlight flooded the room, bright and unsparing, washing over the furniture. She stood in the center of the light, and for the first time, she did not reach to close the blinds. The following day, the journal sat on the kitchen counter, open. The ink was darker, the strokes more aggressive. It read, "Who told you your best years were behind you?" Maya stood over it, her hands gripping the edge of the counter until her knuckles turned white. She did not answer. She could not. The silence of the house no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a cage. She walked away, but the question followed her into the living room, vibrating in the air. She tried to busy herself with chores, but every task felt hollow. The next morning, the book did not wait for her to find it. It lay on the table, the pages turned to a new, stark entry. The words were short, clipped, and devoid of the previous gentle tone. It read, "You are not waiting for permission. You are waiting for courage." The impact was physical. Maya felt a sudden, sharp tightness in her chest, a demand for movement that she could no longer ignore. She stared at the page, the ink seeming to pulse under the morning light. The path forward was no longer a suggestion, it was an obligation. Maya did not pack a bag. She did not check the weather. She pulled on her sneakers, the laces tight against her arches, and stepped out the front door. The air hit her like a physical blow. It was sharp, biting, and smelled of damp earth and coming frost. She began to walk. At first her movements were stiff, her joints protesting the sudden demand for exertion. She pushed forward, turning toward the open road where the wind had no obstacles. It stung her face, turning her skin raw and cold, but she did not turn back. She walked for 1 mile, then 2. The rhythm of her boots on the pavement became a steady, driving pulse. She focused on the mechanical act of breathing, inhaling the frigid air, feeling it expand her lungs, and exhaling the stagnant heat of the house. By the 3rd mile, the numbness in her fingers began to recede. A dull ache in her calves sharpened into a steady, burning heat. Blood surged, a frantic pulse to her tips. She was no longer just moving, she was waking up. Every step was a strike against the last 2 decades of stillness. She reached the end of the road, her chest heaving, her face flushed, and for the first time in 20 years, she stood in the wind and felt entirely, undeniably alive. Maya crossed the threshold of her home, her breath still visible in the hallway. She did not stop to rest. She walked straight to the desk, her pulse still hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She cleared the space, pushing aside stacks of old mail and forgotten receipts. She set her phone on a pile of books, angled it toward the light, and pressed record. She spoke to the lens, her voice steady, outlining the core of her business idea. She did not stutter, she did not look away. When she finished, she watched the playback, then uploaded the file to her social media page. Her finger hovered over the screen for a heartbeat, then she tapped the button. The video was live. She did not stop there. She opened a browser, navigated to the mentorship program portal, and began typing. She filled in the fields with sharp, decisive keystrokes. She hit submit. A confirmation screen blinked in the dim light. She leaned back, her hands resting on the desk. The silence of the house remained. Maya pulled her laptop into the center of the kitchen table. The screen glowed, casting a sharp, white light across the wood grain. She opened a blank document, the cursor blinking like a steady, waiting heartbeat. She placed her fingers on the home row, hesitated, then pressed the first key. The sound was a sharp, percussive snap in the quiet room. She typed a sentence, deleted it, and typed another. Her pace was uneven at first, a stuttering rhythm of doubt and correction. Then the hesitation broke. Her fingers began to fly, a blur of motion against the keys. The screen filled with text, line after line of hard-won clarity. She did not pause for coffee or to check the time. She was building. Every word was a brick, every paragraph a wall rising against the years of silence. The clock on the wall ticked toward midnight, but the sound seemed distant, irrelevant. She was no longer looking back at what she had lost. She was creating what she would become. Her shoulders ached, her eyes burned, but she did not stop. She reached the end of the first chapter, hit the final period, and leaned back. The house was dark, but the screen was bright. She had done it. One evening, Maya reached the final page of the journal. Her hands trembled as she turned the leaf, expecting a map or a set of instructions for the path ahead. Instead, the page was nearly empty. Only one sentence remained. The season was never lost. You were being prepared. She sat on the floor, the weight of the last 20 years shifting in her chest. The air in the room felt different, lighter, as if the dust motes had finally settled. She realized she had not missed her life. She had survived the trials that gave her the wisdom, faith, and courage she lacked in her 20s. The realization was not a sudden explosion, but a slow, steady warmth spreading through her limbs. She stood up, her movements fluid and purposeful. She walked to her desk and picked up a brand new, crisp journal. The paper was clean, unmarked, and full of potential. She opened to the first page, picked up her pen, and let the ink flow. She wrote, Chapter 1. Not because my story is beginning, but because I finally decided to continue it. She set the pen down and looked out the window. The sky was turning a deep, clear blue. She was no longer waiting for permission. She was no longer looking back at the shadows of the attic. She was simply here, present, and ready for what came next. She closed the book, held it against her chest, and took a deep, steady breath. The silence of the house was no longer empty. It was a space waiting to be filled with her own voice.